Crystal. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'll be presenting an overview on the San Joaquin Basin FloodMAR watershed studies. Here. So this is one of three related studies looking at the San Joaquin Basin. There are two other studies that recently came out. First was the State Water Project adaptation strategy. It examined a combination of strategies to help the State Water Project maintain reliable water deliveries and adapt to changing climate. And we kind of say it focused on the west side of the San Joaquin there. And then there's this, and that study came out in August of this year. Then there was the San Joaquin Valley Conveyance Study. That one assesses water conveyance needs in the San Joaquin Valley and outlines the rising risks to water management. And that really looked at the valley floor. And that study just came out last month. And then there's the watershed studies that focused on the tributary watersheds on the east side of the basin. And that study just came out 2 weeks ago. And what we'll be focusing on today. So a quick overview of this presentation. We'll get a little bit in the background of the watershed studies, and then we'll go over just some key findings from these studies. And then the project manager for the FloodMAR program, Jim Weeking, he'll go over the path forward after these studies. So just to keep a couple of high-level takeaways in mind as we go through this overview here. First off, flood risk and overdraft we do see as the biggest threats for the San Joaquin Basin. In existing conditions already, there's a lot of flood risk in the San Joaquin Basin, and there's a lot of critically overdrafted basins. And then when you layer on top of that future climate change, those just get a lot worse. The I-firm strategy, we have two strategies that we'll look at that we looked at in the watershed studies. One of them we call I-firm, Integrated Forecast Informed Reservoir Management or Resources Management. This strategy really uniquely addresses those two risks. It takes that flood risk and turns it into a resource to combat some or mitigate some of that overdraft. And then lastly, FloodMAR, these watershed studies, it really touches a lot of sectors. We call them multi-sector, touches on a lot of different agencies. So implementation will be hard, but not impossible. Okay, so the study areas for our watershed studies, there were 5 watersheds that we looked at. We had the Calaveras, Stanislaus, Tuolumne, Merced, and then the Upper San Joaquin, which is actually a collection of 3 watersheds, the San Joaquin, and then also the Fresno and Chowchilla. These 3 were integrated into one study area, primarily due to the connection between them with Madera Canal from Millerton across those 3 watersheds. And then we also have downstream here, kind of our Vernalis is a control point into the delta where some of the metrics we'll show later will come into play. So what are the objectives of these watershed studies? First off, was to assess climate vulnerability to the San Joaquin Basin, looking at these 3 sectors really, primarily water supply, which was both surface and groundwater, flood risk, and ecosystem, which focused on both riverine and terrestrial ecosystem effects. After that, we looked at the FloodMAR adaptation potential. So as I said earlier, we had 2 strategies that we looked at, and we looked at their potential to help mitigate climate change effects to these sectors and to hopefully improve some benefits to them. And then the last one, which is where we're kind of moving into now, is establishing these partnerships and moving forward with trying to do some implementation of the FloodMAR. So we had a lot of different study partners that we've developed for these studies. So through the 5 watersheds here, a lot of our local partners were irrigation districts, flood agencies, and such. And then we also had some regional partners, Army Corps, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes, CW3E, that provided a lot of helpful input. So just real quick, a timeline of our engagement. We've been working on these studies for about 3.5 years now. Our initial engagement started back in the summer of 2022, where we initially contacted all those study partners to inform them of these studies and start working on the next step, which was the data and model collection. So collecting as much data and models and information about each of these watersheds that we could. After that, we did the climate vulnerability analysis through most of 2023. gave updates back to our partners, and then started our FloodMAR adaptation analysis 2024. Had partner workshops where we presented all the information from our studies to all of our study partners throughout the watersheds. And then this past year has been focused on documentation review and briefings of other agencies. And we're at now our endpoint, the public release, which just happened about 2 weeks ago, where all of our reports and data have been published to our website. And we'll get to that in a bit. So what are the two strategies that we looked at? The first strategy we looked at, we called MAR 9020. This is derived from the State Water Resource Control Board's streamlined permitting guidelines. If anyone's familiar with those, it looks at the daily 90th percentile flow. So to be able to divert water above that 90th percentile flow and up to 20% of the flow in the river. So that's MAR 9020. Essentially, the idea of this one is it's skimming high flow events, just skimming off the top of those hydrographs. And it's really very much focused on water supply, mostly groundwater supply. So the two components of this are really the MAR, the managed aquifer recharge, diverting those skimmed flows, and then doing recharge with them. And we've added a layer to that recharge where we can target that recharge through what we call recharge management areas, RMAs. And on the right side, these maps show these RMAs. We can target in-basin retention to help more water stay within the basin and those aquifers, which can help support GDD, groundwater-dependent ecosystem habitats. We can target disadvantaged communities to try to bolster their groundwater supplies. And then subsidence-prone regions, try to mitigate subsidence that's happening in the upper San Joaquin, Merced areas. Then our other strategy I mentioned earlier is the IFIRM, the Integrated Forecast Informed Resource Management. A major part of this strategy is now reoperating the reservoirs. We can think of the MAR 9020 as a more passive operation, just skimming off those events using existing infrastructure. With IFIRM, we've taken a more active role now, reoperate the reservoirs primarily through forecast informed reservoir operations, so FIRO. We've expanded the benefits of this now. It's looking not just at water supply and groundwater, surface water supply, also flood risk potential, flood risk reduction potential, and ecosystem habitats. So the components of this one are really matching up that FIRO operation with the MAR operations. Ecosystem enhancement, we've done some infrastructure improvements in some of the streams, some off-channel habitat restorations, combined with some reoperations in the reservoirs to get better flows for ecosystem. We still do the targeted recharge like we did in MAR 9020. And then we expand some of the recharge operations, the time window, the footprint. We do in lieu as part of this as well, using MAR water that's available for in lieu operations, some conveyance improvements through some of the irrigation districts. So it's a much bigger expansion through operations and infrastructure in the IFIRM compared to the MAR 9020. So just to get a little more details of the FIRO MAR aspects here, how do we determine the FIRO components? So first, the FIRO space, this is how much we would encroach into the flood space while doing FIRO MAR. So we developed some guidelines on how to determine what that FIRO space, that encroachment into the flood space is. First one was looking at the flood release volume over a 5-day period at the downstream channel capacity. Then looking at the gross storage of the reservoir and trying to hit about 5% of that storage. Looking at the size of the flood space, somewhere around 10 to 20% of the flood space. Some of the other reservoirs could go much higher, but we capped it at a maximum of 50% of that flood space. And then the final FIRO space itself was developed through repeated simulations and testing using these parameters. So we'll look at an example, Lake McClure on the Merced River. So the Merced River channel capacity downstream is 6,000 CFS. So going with our first guideline, 6,000 CFS at 5 days is about 60,000 acre feet. That's about 6% of the total storage, pretty close to our second guideline, and about 17% of the flood space, so pretty close to our third guideline. And then that was tested under a number of events with and without climate change. And the final determination was that, yeah, 60,000 acre feet of FIRO space worked well for here. And the idea was to try to maximize the benefits of the FIRO and FIRO MAR without inducing any kind of flood risks downstream by encroaching into the flood space. So looking at the rule curve of Lake McClure, the conservation space is here in the gray, flood space is here in the lighter color, and then in the red shows the FIRO space that we encroach into in the flood space, that's 60,000 acre feet. And the time frame of that is from November through end of March. All right, so now integrating the FIRO aspect with the MAR aspect in those operations, how does it work? So we'll take a look again at our Lake McClure example here, our rule curve, and we'll look at a hypothetical event. Storage is coming into this event. We're in the conservation space, no flood condition yet. But then our forecast shows, oh, there is some sort of inflow coming in. We've got a forecasted event. If it's big enough to show that our storage would go up and above the FIRO space, we can start to do what we call a conservation space pre-release. Pre-release out of the reservoir, divert as much of that pre-release for the use of MAR for recharge, open up some flood space in the reservoir to try to absorb some of that event coming in. After the event is passed, if the forecast shows clear skies, no events coming in, then we do the next step, which is the MAR release in the FIRO space. So at this point, first we try to make sure we meet any minimum downstream flows requirements, and then we release at a rate to maximize the diversion for recharge at the downstream location. If now we see that an event has come again, we have another flood event forecasted, we can start to increase those releases. So now we can do flood control releases on top of the MAR releases to open up more space in the reservoir. We can dip back down into the conservation space if needed to try to absorb that event again. Once we get to the end of March, the FIRO MAR period ends. Sometimes we could still be encroached in the flood space, though. We don't want to just lose that water by making some large flood release or something. So we can protect that water. And each reservoir has different ways of protecting it or different uses. But the idea is to protect that water. And we could do potentially some sort of ecosystem operations, things like shorebird habitat or spring pulse and inundation releases, recession flows. If we've done all those and there's still water available in this flood space, then we can roll it over into water supply for the reservoir as it goes into the year, back into the conservation space. So we try not to lose that water, try to make some other uses of it, focusing first on ecosystem and then water supply. Okay. So we can look at some key findings now, some results. So first we'll look at the amount of recharge we've seen. So with our MAR 9020, the average annual applied recharge is about 96,000 acre feet per year. And broken down between our 5 watersheds, the Tuolumne, Merced, Upper San Joaquin do the majority of that recharge, and then Stanislaus and Calaveras. With our iFirm, now with the reoperation, really, capturing those flows in the reservoir, metering them out at a slower rate, we see about 4 times as much recharge, 410,000 acre feet per year. And now predominantly a lot of that recharge is in the Tuolumne and Merced watersheds. This is average annual though, and it is really dependent on the type of year. If it's a very wet year versus a very dry year, in dry years we might see 0 or little or no recharge. So looking at our maximum annual amount of applied recharge out of the hydrology data set that we modeled for the MAR 9020 was about 1.1 million acre feet of recharge across the entire basin. And here's the values per watershed. And with the iFirm, that more than doubled to about 2.6 million acre feet of recharge across the entire basin. So it is highly variable, like I said, depending on the hydrology, if it's a wet year versus a drier year. We do also track from the Frank Current Canal out of Millerton up to about 55,000 acre feet per year of recharge under the iFirm strategy. This goes outside of our study area, so we don't have models to see the actual recharge of that, so it is just tracked separately. So out of the flood marsh strategies mitigate overdraft, especially the climate-induced overdraft. So in our baseline, we see about 400,000 acre feet per year of overdraft in the San Joaquin Basin. A majority of that is in the Upper San Joaquin and Merced watersheds. With climate change, we see an additional 93,000 acre feet per year of overdraft on top of that 400,000. So nearly 500,000 acre feet of overdraft. And again, the Upper San Joaquin and Merced is where we see those largest increases. So we're recharging anywhere from about 100 to 400,000 acre feet per year, depending on the strategy. Where does that water go? Not all of it stays in the aquifers. A portion, about a third, a quarter to a third, is retained in storage within the aquifers. Some of it becomes subsurface outflow that moves to other subbasins, other aquifers outside of our areas. About half of it does actually return back to streams. So it seeps back out from the aquifers back to the streams, either the tributaries or the San Joaquin River. And we'll track what happens to that water a little bit later in the presentation. And then a small portion of it is pumped. So let's look at what happens with that portion that is retained in storage. So with the MAR 9020, we're able to mitigate about 33,000 acre feet per year of that overdraft. So climate induced was about 90,000. About a third of that can be mitigated with the MAR 9020 strategy. And the predominant amount of that is happening in the Merced and Upper San Joaquin, and then somewhat also in the Calaveras. With the iFirm, 100, a little over 100,000 acre feet is staying in those aquifers. So we've mitigated the climate-induced overdraft and chipped away a little bit at the baseline overdraft, but we haven't completely mitigated all the overdraft. FloodMAR alone won't solve the overdraft problems. It'll help mitigate climate-induced overdraft and a little bit of the baseline, but it doesn't solve everything. But again, it does mitigate quite a bit of that, and we see a lot of groundwater level increases in the Merced, Tuolumne, and Upper San Joaquin watersheds, and also in the Calaveras watershed. So now we can look at flood risk reduction. So first looking at the baseline, these two streams, Tuolumne River and Upper San Joaquin River, already have flood risk problems in just the baseline current conditions. Tuolumne River's channel capacity is about 9,000, Upper San Joaquin is 8,000, and you can see in the baseline that maximum simulated flow from our time series is much greater than the channel capacity, 43 and 36 respectively. With climate change, those peak flows are only getting larger. We're seeing much more flood risk happening on those two streams. Merced River, its baseline peak flow is right at channel capacity. It's right there, but with climate change, that gets pushed to about 5 times what the channel capacity is, that peak flow. So we see a really large increase in the Merced River in that max event. Calaveras and Stanislaus, they do stay at their channel capacity, both in baseline current and with climate change. But another issue for them is that they have operational capacity issues. Their operational capacity, where we see erosion, maybe seepage, other effects, even if it's not beyond the channel capacity, is lower than that design capacity. So on the Stanislaus, it's about 5,000 CFS compared to the design of 8. On Calaveras, it's about 7 compared to the design of 12. So we do go above what we call as that operational capacity. And looking at the right here, the maximum number of days above that operational capacity, that increases with climate change. We have bigger, longer events. So we're at or above that design or operational capacity for longer with climate change. So that's just more pressure on the levees, more time that those levees are being saturated, more likelihood of erosion and breaching happening. So what can the FloodMAR strategies do? So on the Tuolumne, Merced, and Upper San Joaquin, the MAR 9020, it's not really much on flood benefits. As we saw earlier, it really does focus more on that water supply benefit. It's really just skimming off the top of those hydrographs. So we see a slight reduction in those peak flows as it's skimming off those events. iFirm, through that reoperation, we're able to decrease those peak flow events much greater. It doesn't get us back down to design capacity, but there is a substantial reduction, over 20,000 CFS in Tuolumne. Merced, we cut that peak flow in about half, a little bit of reduction on Upper San Joaquin. In the Calaveras Stanislaus watersheds, through the iFirm action, through that reoperation, we're able to bring those peak flows down to that operational capacity. So getting a flood benefit there by getting us back down to more of that operational flow. And then the number of days where we're at or above that operational capacity greatly reduces with the iFirm strategy. You can see here Calaveras went from 17 days to just 2 days. Stanislaus, 84 days down to 8. And even these other watersheds, also the duration of those events have been reduced. So less time of water on those levees. So really right here, we've just been looking at the max event. We modeled 100 years of hydrology. So I just wanted to show that other events, maybe the max event doesn't necessarily have huge reductions, but we do see other effects throughout that 100 years. So here we're just looking at the Tuolumne River, looking at the maximum annual peak flow over that 100 years that we modeled. And these were the four flood events that we saw from that modeling: 51, 83, 97, 2017, that went above the design capacity. With climate change, those events got much worse. 97 in particular went from a peak flow of around 28 to over 70. But we see new flood events: 69, 83 gets bigger, 86, 2006. We see other flood events now going beyond the design capacity. With iFirm, we're able to at least eliminate those other events that were induced from climate change and then bring down our other events that were there from the baseline. 51 event is reduced from 50 down to about 25. 97 event is reduced. 2017 also reduced greatly. So we do see in other years bigger effects on flood risk reduction. Okay, so the iFirm strategy does provide opportunities for improving habitats. I talked about that in the adaptation strategy slide through the reoperation, some infrastructure improvements. We do look at improving ecosystem habitats. So we have some restoration done on on these streams that's paired with that reoperation, doing things like those spring pulse releases or base flow releases to create some higher quality off-channel habitat. We do maintain the enhanced wet season base flows to improve in-stream salmon spawning and rearing habitat. So again, some of it is through the reoperation. Some of it is that return to stream that we saw earlier on when we do that recharge. A lot of that water does return to stream as base flow, helping out the base flows in the streams. We're improving the groundwater conditions surrounding the groundwater-dependent ecosystems as we recharge and bring up those groundwater levels. That has a benefit on the GDs. And then we create some other new ecological assets through enhanced stream flows. We do the seasonal shorebird habitat. This is inundating areas that are good for shorebird habitat using that banked Furo water in that post-April timeframe and inundating some fields, creating some shorebird habitat through the month of April. And then another concept we have was multi-benefit flow-through basins along a lot of the creeks in our study areas. These are like little transitory storage areas along creeks where when the water gets to a certain stage, they start to fill up, create some ecohabitat, some flood risk reduction, and some groundwater recharge as well. Okay, so final point here: recharge diversions upstreams don't translate directly to a reduction in San Joaquin River flow. So as I've mentioned a couple times now, that return to stream, we divert water upstream. It gets recharged through the fields, and a large portion of it does come back as base flow into the streams, either later in that year or in other years. So upstream recharge diversions of Vernalis is about 394,000 acre feet per year, but the change in flow at Vernalis itself is about 200,000 acre feet per year. So about 50% of that diversion upstream is actually showing up as a change in flow at Vernalis. And since LunchMAR is very active in the wet and above normal years, we do see large reductions, or we see reductions in flow at Vernalis. But in the drier and critical years, we do see that water increase because of that base flow returning to the tributaries in San Joaquin River. So we do see an actual increase in flows at Vernalis due to the recharge. All right, so we have a set of reports. We have a basin-wide summary and next steps report. We have 5 watershed reports, 5 fact sheets. We also have a study design report and a lot of technical documentation. All of this is on our website now. We also have a results dashboard that can go into much more detail of results than I've just gone into. It looks at all our climate scenarios, all the different climate time horizons. All the metrics are in there. And then we have a data download tool where you can download those results from the dashboard. So this was all posted 2 weeks ago on our website. This is a screenshot of our website. All of those reports and the dashboard and data download tool, all those links are available. Here's the link to the website here, or you can just Google San Joaquin Watershed Studies. It's all available and posted. for everybody to look at. So I'm going to turn it over to the FloodMAR project manager, Jim Weeking, to go over the last two slides.
All right, thanks, David. And good afternoon, FloodMARers. So I wanted to make a few comments about next steps for the watershed studies and Department of Water Resources. Included in the studies is a call to action, and you'll find that in each of the reports. And the call to action, kind of the punchy version of it, is partnerships, pilots, and basin-wide implementation. And we are suggesting that partnerships will be necessary to get to implementation. And so we're specifically thinking about watershed partnerships, but then also issue resolution partnerships. And we've identified a number of issues that those issue resolution partnerships can work on. And that should begin soon. In addition, we think that pilots are going to be essential. One of our observations in the development of the iFirm concept is that both forecast-informed reservoir operations and recharge have, within their current implementation arcs, they have opportunities for pilots. They have either, temporary implementations or pilots or something that will facilitate kind of a try it out, see and learn from doing approach to implementation. And then finally, we're calling for a basin-wide implementation of the iFirm strategy. And so there's a recognition that we would not only need, excuse me, watershed partnerships, but basin-wide partnerships in order to get to the benefits that become improved at the basin-wide scale. So, for example, if a single watershed implemented iFirm, you saw some of the flood benefits. If a single watershed implemented those benefits, that would be great for that river. But the effect downstream, especially on the lower San Joaquin, and you can imagine near Stockton in particular, and into the Delta, that you would not get the cumulative effect that you would get if you did it on all of the reservoirs. And we're beginning to do assessments now of what those cumulative effects would look like. And similarly, the recharge implementations can be mutually beneficial across watershed boundaries. So if a particular watershed didn't do recharge, then likely the recharge that's occurring in the other watershed, since the recharge we found is fairly transient, um, that that if it's not being done in one of the watersheds, then probably they'll receive benefits from the other watersheds. And so we think a collective basin-wide implementation for the recharge benefits as well will be important and beneficial. And then just to come back to the three studies that David mentioned earlier, Department of Water Resources see these as connected because of their connections to the San Joaquin Valley in particular. And here's kind of the rollout that's occurred over the last 6 months. First, the State Water Project Adaptation Strategy came out, and then the San Joaquin Valley Conveyance Study recently. And finally, the San Joaquin Basin Watershed Studies came out a couple of weeks ago. each of those studies will be included in a San Joaquin Valley Resilience Strategy that's going to come out early next year. And that document will be public. And so we'll have an opportunity for public comments, and then we'll ultimately put out a final draft based on those public comments that will, and the document really hopes to describe the three studies and their effects, and then also do a little bit of assessment of how the three study efforts work together. And so you'll see some results about how potentially those three studies and their results that they're showing, how they cumulatively would potentially work together. And after that document comes out, there'll be a San Joaquin Summit, and that will be later in the spring. Look for that. But the big thing to keep your eyes out for, if you'd like to give some input on the resilience strategy, look for that early next year. And then finally, we wanted to acknowledge a lot of great people that worked on the watershed studies. And so a lot of folks that participate in the FloodMAR network and these LunchMAR activities. And so we want to say thank you to all that have had great input, and appreciate all that many folks have done, and lots of contributions in terms of ideas and thoughts and development of strategies over the years. And David will answer your questions now if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you.
David. Thank you, Jim. This is time for questions. I have been keeping an eye on the chat. There's been a little bit of back and forth. There is, I want to highlight the link to the watershed studies was added in the chat, water.ca.gov/watershed studies. So feel free to check them out there. I'll go ahead and read out loud the first question, which is from Gretchen Murphy. If anybody, I do see two hands that are raised as well in the audience, so we will go there first. Actually, Gretchen is got her hand up first, so I'm going to ask her to unmute and she can ask her question.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me, hopefully?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So in the studies, there is a footnote in relation to when y'all are looking at the outflow above the Salmonid immigration target that says it's coming from an AFRP document, but there's no citation for it. Can you all help me locate that document, please?
Yeah. Remember? Yeah.
I also put the text of the footnote in chat if that's helpful for you guys to understand what I'm asking about.
Just came on. I think he's got the answer.
Hi, good afternoon. Yeah, I can take a look at the AFRP. So that's the Anadromous Fish Restoration Program for floats. And this, I think, is the 96 version of it that were released just prior to CalFed, but I can track down the source and send it over to you.
Thank you. That would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Gretchen. Next, we have Emmanuel.
Hello, hi, good afternoon. Hi, this is Emmanuel Sinas with the socioeconomic analysis section with the Division of Planning. Hey, David and Jim. Thank you for this presentation. I just thought that it's very insightful and informative, and I think this is a really excellent work that you have done. and I'm grateful for that. My question is, you mentioned about about the path forward, about potential investors and partnership structures or something like that. So I was just wondering if you're looking at developing cost estimates for basin-wide implementation, and how will that path forward will go along with getting the investors or other partnership for this implementation that you're looking at.
Yeah, we certainly agree that that economics will be very helpful to get to implementation. And we think, especially since these type of solutions are what we're calling multi-sector, and so there's benefits across a range of entities and interests that may be involved with funding. So getting to the economics will be real helpful. I think, yeah. I'm not sure. We don't have a firm plan going forward about when that might happen or how it might happen, but appreciate the comment and acknowledge the need for doing those economics, especially to get to the long-term implementations.
All right, thank you, Jim. The next question we have is from Michael Founds.
Hey there. Great presentation, everyone. That's really incredible work. My question is a little bit about the next steps. So we understand that there's all these great strategies for reoperation of the reservoir, and the Corps might look at that in their water control manual updates. I'm curious about how the downstream actions are going to take place and what kind of coordination would be required, because it seems like with any FUROMAR plan, there would be kind of a trade-off between whether you do an fully AgMAR strategy or whether you update infrastructure within the system to allow greater conveyance. Could someone speak to a little bit of how the decisions will unfold and what role DWR expects to play in the kind of operation of that, or just in coordination between the Army Corps, water management agencies, and other groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a question that we hope that we'll begin to get to some answers on in the resilience strategy that's coming out at the beginning of the year. And so right now we're thinking about pilots, and our suspicion is that those will be simplified versions of what we've looked at in the studies. And so getting to those pilots and learning from what we observe in terms of doing the recharge and reoperating the reservoir will be very helpful in getting to the long-term solutions. And then the way that the whole package of actions that are part of the different strategies, the 90-20 or the IFIRM, the way that those are implemented will ultimately be up to the partnerships that are established. And so we're imagining that getting the partnerships together and then giving them the ability to understand everything that we've done in our strategies and the results that we're seeing as of all the actions that were included in the strategies, and then hopefully set a foundation for being able to move forward with implementations that can achieve the outcomes that people agree are the ones that they want to see accomplished.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michael.
The next two questions, first up is Daniel Mountjoy, and then I'll toss to Poyam.
There we go. Hi, this is Daniel. Just to add on to what Jim was saying in response to Michael's question, I think one of the powerful pieces of this whole integrated modeling effort was that some of the tools that were built for the modeling can also be used now for the decision making at the implementation scale. For instance, Woodard and Curran and the Sustainable Conservation and Earth Genome teams are building user-operated tools that were used in the watershed studies, but are being customized for user scenario building. So one of the things we've heard from some of the districts is, should we build new infrastructure to convey water to a new area, or should we incentivize water recharge in the existing acreage that's currently able to be served with existing conveyance? And so some of these questions around management, decision making, as you said, Michael, downstream from the water releases, have very big sort of economic implications. And there's different recharge methods possible, whether it's floodplain establishment or more recharge basins or on-farm recharge. And these tools that have been developed now can be used at the local scale using the data from the watershed studies to help locals start to make some of those comparisons with their financial data in terms of what these projects might cost. So I just wanted to add that to what Jim had offered.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, and there's several other things going on in terms of advancing these ideas and getting closer to understanding how things can move forward. For example, right now we're evaluating these strategies as part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. Our team David is leading that effort. And one of the things that will be nice is we'll get to see those cumulative effects that will, come from a coordinated implementation of this kind of concept. What kind of effect will that have downstream on this lower San Joaquin and into the Delta? And then, so there's lots of foundational material. We very much think that the watershed studies are a foundation, but there's lots more ultimately information that will be needed and developed as we move along. As Daniel indicated, there are tools that are being they're actually modified from the watershed study tools, and they're hoping to make those useful so that folks can kind of look at their system and see how they can do things in different ways in terms of recharge, and then and then maybe have some tools that can work in real time. So those are all great advancements that we think will move us all forward in the right direction together.
Great. Thank you, Daniel and Jim. Next question is from Poyam.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So, great presentation. And I kind of wanted to follow on sort of the similar line of questionings about the next steps. It's clear for the watershed scale pilot projects, there's a lot of, and you mentioned this in multiple ways, that there's a lot of pieces, there's a lot of different parts to those projects, and then with that, a lot of different people involved, different organizations.
I'm sorry, your microphone is just a little bit quiet. Is there any way you can move a little closer to it?
Is that better?
Yeah, it's a little bit better. Thank you.
Okay. Let me see if I can turn it up. But basically, I was just saying, it seemed like there's a lot of components to the what would be required for a pilot project and a lot of people involved. And I'm curious about which watersheds seem like they have the most desire at this point based on the different interactions that you've had in this process or willingness to implement these. I realize there's a lot of different people or organizations involved, and you haven't, coordinated with all of them. Um, and sort of separately from that, it's not so much of a question. I mean, I'm pretty sure that those places that probably have the greatest desire, they may not overlap with the place where there's the greatest impact for one of these pilot projects. I know you've talked about the cumulative impact, but even for a single project, sort of the biggest bang for your buck, I suspect that may not align with where you think it's most likely to happen next. But I'm just kind of curious about that difference, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yeah, we have started thinking about where pilots might be most effective. Um, and honestly, all of the watersheds have different strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot of variability across the 5 watersheds and the 7 reservoirs that we looked at and applied the iFirm concept to. And so it's definitely not a clear-cut answer about where's the best for all the potential benefits. It's a little bit depending which outcome you might be most interested in. So um, we're we're weighing our options. We're starting to talk to locals about the potential for pilots, and we'll hopefully progress over the next several months in terms of selecting and then advancing a pilot or maybe more than one.
All right. Thank you. We do have a question in the chat that I'm going to read out loud from David Fairman. Is there anything in the studies that addresses potential water quality considerations, and how do you see water quality being considered in the implementation of these strategies?
Yeah, another good question. So we made a decision early on to not add on water quality assessments to our tool sets, but recognize the need to that it's an important implementation consideration. And then I'm imagining that that's something that will probably be acknowledged as we get into the partnerships and the pilots, and then especially important for the long-term implementation.
Great, thank you for that response. And then there is a follow-up question from Emmanuel. I don't know if you wanted to ask it, or I can read it aloud for you. You say, oh, you've come off mute.
Sure. No worries. So, yeah, this is a follow-up question to my earlier question on the economic side of the, LunchMAR implementation. What funding strategy are you considering to cover both the upfront capital cost and long-term operation and maintenance? And how do you envision allocating cost shares across for example, participating agencies, beneficiaries, and potential investors? Or have you really looked at this level yet? Or, you know,
Thanks, Emmanuel. Yeah, I mean, this is another one that is going to go to the partnerships and that they're going to have to decide how to, um, manage the potential funding sources, the limitations of those funding sources, especially related to O&M for in terms of the potential state investment. But yeah, this is definitely going to go to um, the partnerships.
great, thank you.
Great. Do we have, oh, yep, there is another question from Michael Founds. Michael, do you want to ask your question or I can read it aloud?
I can ask it. I guess we talk about the partnerships, and I imagine it will get contentious at some point when there's trade-offs between environment, water supply, economics, etc. What is being kind of thought of as the process to try and make decisions? Because I guess if there's no process to resolve conflict, it seems like it will be hard to move forward. So how can partnerships be built that kind of have a process to, I don't know, take all this useful information and make a decision that works at least a little bit for everyone?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so our initial thinking that have been describing in our presentations that we've done for other state agencies and other interests is that we've suggested two partnership efforts. One being um, local watershed partnerships, which are going to be ultimately the implementers. And then secondly, issue resolution partnerships as well. And those issue resolution partnerships are, I think, the ones that you're hinting at that will need to work through challenging issues like water rights, effects on species and habitat, and mitigation of those effects, etc. So yeah, we envision that the partnerships are going to provide the avenues for getting to those solutions, and then how those partnerships do that um, is going to be it is going to be interesting to see as it unfolds.
Absolutely. So we do have time for one more question, if there is one. Otherwise, we can wrap up a little bit early. And I do want to just, on behalf of everybody here, give you both David and Jim a big round of applause and thank you for this really informative presentation. Very relevant to FloodMAR interests across the state and even beyond the state. So thank you very much. Not seeing any other questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap this up on time and send you guys on your way. This webinar has been recorded and it will be posted in this similar fashion to how all of the FloodMAR webinars are posted on the Hub website, the best place to find it. So I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you in the new year on January 7th for the Solar Mar presentation. All right. Thank you,
Marissa.
everybody.